Before we start our session, I would like to request you all to keep your mobile phone on silent mode for a smooth conduct of the session. Friends, it's indeed an honor and pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Harish Paul Sir, Provost of Vanita Vishram Women's University. Professor Paul has obtained PhD in biotechnology from University of Delhi. For 17 years, he developed his career in USA at different places like Temple University in Philadelphia, University of Chicago, and Northwestern University in Evanston. He was assistant director and associate professor at Northwestern University. In 1996, he came back to India and joined as professor of biochemistry at the MS University of Baroda. In 1999, he joined as the director of B.D. Patel Pharmaceutical Education and Research Development in Ahmedabad. In 2007, he took responsibility as the project director of National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Ahmedabad. He rendered his service as the Vice Chancellor of Sardar Patel University for 2 consecutive terms. Cell and molecular biology is the area of his interest. He has more than 170 research publications in reputed journals and around 6,500 citations with cumulative impact factor 280, H index 39 and item index 82. He is advisor of Government of Gujarat for pharmaceutical and biotechnology matters, and he has received many excellent awards as well. So friends, we have indeed a global personality with us today. So sir, I welcome you to the 23rd session of Abhigya-A. Before we start with, I would like to request Deputy Director of School of Commerce and Business Management, Dr. Krishna Desai, to welcome Dr. Harish Paul sir with a small moment. Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Thank you, sir. So, without taking much of the time, I would like to request Dr. Harish Paul sir to continue with his book review. He'll be talking on early Indians, the story of our ancestor and where we came from, written by Tony Joseph.
हाँ आटला फ्रेम में आई है
Hello. Okay. Well, good morning to everyone. And it is indeed a pleasure to talk to young students and young faculty of Vanita, Vishram Children's University. This kind of book review, I'm doing it for the first time. But the reason for choosing this particular book are many, at least several, and I'll point them out as we go along. And it is told, it's by Tony Joseph. He is a historian, and more than that, he is a good writer. And he addresses three questions that I have highlighted here. He highlighting his mind. That who were the Harappans? You know, we all study Harappan civilization in our school. Who were Harappans? Did the Aryans migrate to India? This is a very controversial, debatable theory that Aryans came from somewhere. People here think that no, Aryans are people who developed within India and then they might have gone outside. So this is a controversial thing. It addresses, the book addresses this. And when did the caste system develop originally? So these are from sociological angle, from psychological, from our country's functioning. These are some of the very fundamental issues. And particularly, we should know who we are, how we developed into what we are today. Now we are 130 crore people in India. Plus, if you add the neighboring countries, because this political boundaries developed only in last 175, 100 years back. But population-wise, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, even to some of the Myanmar, these people are not very different population-wise. So, what we are talking about is not only 130 crores, we are talking about roughly 180 crores people in this subcontinent as people. So, these were the things which attracted me. And one important aspect is that in past several years, we have also been working on some of these aspects of genetics of Indian population. So I will also give you a glimpse of our finding, although it's not a part of the book. But then we will relate it to how it relates to the main content of this book. The book is very nice, easy to read, and those who have read other works of Tony Joseph will definitely enjoy it. And if you have not done, at least if the topic interests you, I urge you to read it. Okay. This is the book. It is published by Jagannath and publisher. And next slide. Now, before we understand our population, we need to understand some basics about our universe and our planet Earth. I don't know how many of you remember that our planet Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Planet Earth here, 4.5 billion. And if you talk about the solar system, do you know when there was a Big Bang? I know I'm not supposed to ask questions, but being a teacher, it comes out. So that was about 13 billion years ago. But our Earth is young by 4.5 billion years. There was no life here. The first life appeared about 1 billion years after the formation of Earth. And they were tiny microbes. There are so many theories how it developed, we will not go into it. The red line that you see is the amount of oxygen in the air. In the beginning there was no oxygen. Then there were some organisms which learn how to split water and create oxygen. And this is the accumulated level of oxygen in the atmosphere. And once there was enough of oxygen in the atmosphere, you can see that most of the lives develop, most of the lives that we see, larger plants, larger animals, they all developed in the last 1.5 billion years. And if you see even the vertebrates, the larger animals, developed only after 4.2 billion years of Earth's life. And this is the present. Now, human being, Homo sapien as we know, is supposed to have developed only 1 million years ago. Remember, 4.5 billion, that is 4,500 million. Out of that, our existence as human being is only 1 million years. I can have the next slide. And out of this million years, about 900,000 years will remain in Africa. We are supposed to have developed in Africa. But most of the time we were confined to African continent, somewhere here. And it was only during last 1 lakh years, that 100,000 years, we started coming out of Africa. And as you can see, that through this route and some other routes also we'll discuss later on, people went to Europe not too long ago, about 40,000 years. And this is how the population has spread throughout the planet Earth over a period of time. The latest arrival was of human being in American continent, which was about 18,000 years ago. So, what I am trying to say is the overall history of the world, of the planet Earth is very long. We are only here for the last about 1 million years, and out of that, we have developed these different continents through populations very recently, in the relatively speaking. Next. Now, the main question is that India's population is very unique. We call it unity in diversity. But there is no other place in the world where the population is so diverse, linguistically, anthropologically means the features, and later on we will learn that even DNA profile is a very unique in Indian population. So, how did this diversity develop? More importantly, how did we tolerate the diversity that the different people coming from different places at different times? How did they assimilate and develop the population that we see in the Indian continent now? Next one. Now, if you see the major races in India are Caucasoid. Caucasoid means like European. And you can see that this northwest part is by and large populated by that. Those people who came from, who are resembling European race. This is Australoids. We'll discuss this later on, that some of the original arrivals on this subcontinent were these people about 70,000, 65,000 years back. We'll discuss this. And then in the northeast and Ladakh, there are some Mongoloids people resembling Chinese and other Asian populations. So, the race-wise, this is our composition. But this is rather misleading because these are only a major features. Most of the time, there is a lot of admixing. Admixing means cross-breeding, and there is no isolated populations which represents the original populations in India, or there is no population which represents, because there has been a lot of admixing throughout the history. Later on we will talk about the caste, how we develop. that is only about 1,500 years back that we got segregated in groups, what we call caste. And the religions is also not very old. About 1,000 years back, some European and Mughals and all that started, and that's how the Muslims and Christians and all other diversity came. So those are very recent. What we are talking about is in a larger, much longer scale of time. And the next one. Now, what we are talking here is the prehistory. Now, history is something clear that there are documents, there is a proof, you can prove it, you can disprove it, you can debate it, but that is a history. And our recorded history, our means not only India but overall general, is not more than 2,500, maybe at the most 3,000 years back. So, you imagine they started about 100,000 years back, and only 3,000 years we know something about it. What happened on those 97,000 years is a kind of murky details. How do we find out? We call it prehistory. Prehistory means it's not a definite historical record. So how do we find prehistory? These are our methods. We do archaeological survey, archaeological expeditions. But this group is very scattered. Something we find in what is now Pakistan, and Arab, or something we find in rural area. But then it may be a small fraction of the total that we won't know the full details through archaeology. So it's a very sketchy. Anthropology is just a morphological description of the face and the other features of the human being. But that is also important to some extent. Artifacts. The artifacts that we find are also very sketchy. Sometimes we find something from Lothal, sometimes we find something from Kolavira. About a few weeks back, there was something about Kolavira there. So these are the artifacts, some of the pots and some of the instruments or some evidence of this kind of thing we find. But that is also very sketchy. Carbon dating helps us to put the time on the artifacts. That these artifacts, I don't know how many of you know carbon dating, but this is a radioisotope carbon 14. And that tells you that this particular artifact was developed about 2,000 years back, or 5,000, or 10,000. And similarly, if we find a bone, we can date the bone, that this bone must be around 5,000 years back. So it's an important science technique of dating an artifact. And important tool is the linguistics. I don't know how many of you heard about Indo-European languages. That lot of commonality between European language and Indian Sanskrit and Hindi and other languages. So that where does the commonality come from and what does it indicate? It indicates some evidence that this population is derived from some precursor or pre-generator of this population. And they have developed some primitive Sanskrit or European mix, what we call Indo-European, and that is how it developed. So archaeology evidence is very sketchy. This is a little bit strong. And other things are also indicative, and you can put some sketchy details onto what you are doing. In last 20 years or so, particularly in last 10 years, the DNA sequencing has developed. And DNA sequencing is very important because it remains, it is transmitted from parents to children. And in that, there are some changes that are also transmitted from generation to generation. DNA some part of DNA sequence like mitochondria, that doesn't change. So it goes from woman to all her children, and likewise, it transcends on the maternal route of transmission. And similarly, Y chromosome, I don't want to go into the biology of this, but Y chromosome is this way transmitted through paternal route. So male and his male children will get the Y chromosome. And that doesn't change much. These two don't change much. So if you know the sequence of Y chromosome and mitochondrial chromosome, then you can see that the ancestors of this particular group must have developed somewhere, and this is how they descended on Indian language. These are very brief technologies that without going into the complexity, I want to tell you, these are the tools available for understanding what we are, how we got into where we are, and our composition. Next one. Now, before I go to the main part of the book, this was the study that we had done in last 2 years, 3 years back, and I published it only last March, not even March, I think May or June. What we did was we took 4 people, one a Gujarati male, one a South Indian lady, one a Mizoram male, and we had also taken one Kashmiri Pandit, which I have not shown here. And what we did was we did a complete sequencing, and we tried to find out the ancestors of these 4 individuals were coming from which part of the world, when they might have come. We are talking about ancestors. So the next slide. I don't know if you can see the details. This is the origin Africa. And if you talk about Gujarati male, his maternal ancestors went from Africa to, this is called Central Asia. No, this is not Central Asia. This is the Western Asia and Eastern Europe part. And from there, they have descended to India, probably using the route that I have indicated. This is what we find in our study. And if you look at the South Indian women, and this timeline is about 15,000 years. Now this is maximum. It could be 5,000 years also. But maximum is not before 15,000 years. The maternal and the paternal ancestors of this Gujarati individual came to India. If you look at the South Indian woman, her kind of mitochondrial DNA is not found anywhere. They probably came through the coastal route, the green line that you can see here. And from here, there is the evidence that they also went to Andaman Nicobar and then ultimately to Australian Aboriginal. And that timeline is about 65,000 years. And if you look at Mizoram, the Mizoram paternal as well as maternal ancestors developed, migrated to this route to China, Japan, Asian countries, and then they came and settled into the northeast part of India. That timeline is 40,000 years. This was our work. Unfortunately, we got a lot of good coverage in Times of India front page, twice we had coverage. And these are our 2 published papers, genomics, and this is a mammalian genome. So this was our work. Now I'll try to relate and support what Tony Hunter says in his book by using this. The next one. Now using DNA as the evidence. Now this is not my work. This is a work that is cited in the book by the author. For understanding Indian populations, we need to remember three major migrations. One, I already told you, the South Indian women, that from here, perhaps coastal route, they settled here. Long back, 65,000 years. This is southwest Iran. One migration has come from this area in the northern part of India. This was about 8,000-10,000 years back. And then they mixed with the original population here. And the Harappan and the Sindh civilization was a result of the mixing of these two populations. The third region, which is a kind of plains in this area, which is approximately Kazakhstan currently, that has contributed a migratory wave to Indian population. Not only towards India, but another wave have also gone to European countries. And these are perhaps the precursors of Indo-European languages. That the same population earlier went to Europe, and after about 500-700 years, they came to India using a route through Hindukush, Kaikargar area, Afghanistan, and then settled here. What the author says, our Sanskriti, our civilization that we know in Hindu religion, and our Indian civilization is contributed by these people and the people who were pre-existing here. So there is a lot of adaptation, acceptance, and what we developed as the Aryan Sanskriti is because of not completely locally developed, but origin of language indicates that we came from this area and we developed into this plain after the Harappan civilization had gone. So that migration is expected to be about 3,000 years, 3,500 years. So I want you to remember these three regions. One, that population which came to India long back, about 60,000, 65,000 years back. The other population came about from Iran, which was about 8,000 to 10,000 years back. And third wave, which came from this region, and that was about 3,000 years back. So what we are present is a kind of admixing of all this. So it's like Indian population is like layers. There was a first layer, then the second layer which mixed thoroughly with the first layer, and then there was a third layer which mixed thoroughly. This mixing is not uniform in every part. So that is why you see the different gradations of Indian populations. We have white people in Kashmir as white as any European, and we have a dark people, dark-skinned people who are as skin is as dark as we see in Africa. We have features resembling most of the Western Asian people in the north. In Northeast, we see people resembling more of other Asians. So although we are in Asia, our resemblance is more on the Caucasus side, the West Asia and Europe, less on Japan, Korea, and China. The next one. So these are the area, and this area looks something like this. It's a grassland. There are no high trees. There are no mountains, and it is expected that the preliminary agriculture and the domestication of animals had developed because of this land, prairie land they call it. So that gave rise to the development of agriculture and the domestication of animals, and that is what they brought along with when they went to Europe and when they came to Indian subcontinent. So, major migration waves have been out of Africa directly into this subcontinent and perhaps went to Australia, Andaman, Nicobar and Australia, about 65,000 years back. The next wave we know is about 7,000 before Christ. So that's approximately 9,000 years ago, or maybe 5 to 9,000 years ago. And that is what I said, the Zagros region of southwest Iran. And this happened when the Ice Age ended about 10,000 years back. And early farming herders mixed with early settlers and lead to Harappan civilization. So the Harappan civilization was a result of this pre-existing Indian population and this migration from Iran side, and that is, and I think it lasted about 1,000 years or so, and about 700 BC, that's about 2,700 years ago, the Harappan civilization died. That means decimated. We don't know why. Some people say it's because of climatic changes. Some people say there may be different reasons. But whatever were the reasons, some people say that because agriculture and other things were developed in the mainland, so the importance of this trade route, Harappan region, has diminished. So whatever is the reasons, but that ended about 3,000 years back. And then this is the European steppe region, what I said, Kazakhstan. So the last wave that we know, it's not really last, immigration continues, but the major last wave from DNA perspective is about less than 4,000 years. That is after the diminishing of Harappan civilization. And these are the people who brought Indo-European speakers. They brought some preliminary languages through which Sanskrit on this side and European language like German and other developed on the other side. That's the commonality, and that also reflects into our genetic resemblance to Caucasian people and not to the rest of the Asia. What we don't know is what has happened between this 60,000 years ago and about 10,000 years ago. So we have a lot of gap. And this lot of gap is something we should worry about, ponder about. That the picture we are developing is not really that complete. It may be, we still need a lot of fine genetic mapping. The genetic mapping now is also not that detailed. So we need more of the very fine-grained genetic mapping. Perhaps to understand there are other unknown waves that we have not seen so far. Now, these last migrations, about less than 4,000 years ago, they are likely brought with them early version of Sanskrit, mastery over horses, and the range of new cultural practices such as sacrifice rituals in which we sacrifice animals. So that might have been brought to these people, and all of which, that means the migrants as well as the existing populations, they had developed into form the basis of early Hindu or Vedic culture. So the DNA evidence suggests that it is not 100% originated in India. There is a contribution by language and by some such practices from migrants that came only about 4,000 years back. 1,000 years before, people from steppe had also moved into the Europe. So the steppe region that I showed you, from there some group had also gone to Europe, and they also mixed with the local populations, and that is how the European population and the European languages their origin is in Indo-European languages, very similar to our Sanskrit and other languages. Next. So, as I said earlier, anthropology or archaeology is quite sketchy. Our evidence is wherever we find, but it's never complete, and perhaps never going to be that complete. And this is how we are divided, or not divided, but this is how we are at the moment from anthropological point of view. From linguistic point of view, this map is not very different from other maps, and indicating the evidence that there is a common source for Indo-European languages in steppe region, in Kazakhstan area. This is a broad area, and some people came here, established the Indian Vedic culture, after mixing with local, and some people went to Europe side. The European migration was about 700-800 earlier than our migration to our country. So, the results provide evidence for a significant movement of people into Europe and South Asia in the Bronze Age, a manner that mirrors the shared features of certain Indo-European cultures with others. And steppe astronomers related ancestry spread across Eurasia in the Bronze Age in the manner that parallels specific shared features between different Indo-European. What I explained earlier, that the steppe region in the Kazakhstan area, the Central Asia area, is an important contributor on both sides, in the Indian languages and European languages. One comes away with a clear recognition that Indian genetic history is a mixed and multi-layered, as I said. The author uses the analogy of a pizza preparation. The pizza you need a base, and our base is the people who came 65,000 years. And then there is scattering, you can put some sauce, you can put some toppings, but they are not as uniform as the base. The base we need, but the layer and mixing of different populations, that analogy author has used very nicely in his book. This is the BBC's review of this book, that new research using ancient DNA is rewriting prehistory in India and shows that its civilization is the result of multiple ancient migrations. It's not one, there are multiple migrations. That is what the colleague Joseph The overarching theme is that archaeology, linguistics, and genetics are converging in the archaeological evidence. If the archaeological evidence was lighter, the linguistic evidence is a little stronger. Sanskrit, Indo-Aryan roots from Central Asia migrations between 2000 and 1000 BC. The genetic evidence over the past decade, especially in the last few years, overwhelmingly supports and reinforces the evidence that we have from archaeology and the rest. So it's a kind of unifying approach which supports the scattered evidence from archaeology and little stronger but not a good evidence from linguistics. And it puts it together, and this is what we find. First of all, Indian culture is not synonymous with identical to Aryan or Sanskrit or Vedic culture. So we like to think that it is synonymous, but it's not synonymous because it has developed through mixing of different migratory waves. And Aryan culture was an important stream that contributed to the creating the unique Indian civilizations as we know. So because it was most recent, we see its effect now, Aryan and the Hindu and the Sanskrit. This effect of this is more visible because it's more recent today. But by no means was in the only one. The Aryan culture was most likely the result of interaction, adoption and adaptation among those who brought Indo-European languages to India, and those who were already well settled inhabitants of the region. So, in short, we have good evidence, but not yet complete evidence, to understand the real composition and the development of Indian population. We really need to do a lot more in terms of DNA sequencing and combining it with the other areas, and that is when we will have perhaps a better picture. The first image which emerges is what this book has described and what I have tried to describe for you. So basically, as I say, we need to do more work to really understand, but the glimpse that we are getting is that population on this subcontinent is at least 60,000 years old, and then there are many waves of migrations. We have noted few of them, but that may not be the complete list. And the migratory people have mixed thoroughly, casually with the local populations, and that is how we have developed. The caste system, the Varna system came when the Vedic civilization came, it's about 3,000 years, 2,500 to 3,000 years. The caste system came much later, about 1500 in Buddha's period, 1500 to 1600 years back. But that has been so airtight system that that has again segregated and kind of kept many groups that we see here. But if you go beyond that, we are all more or less the same. We all have a more similar genetic background. Little more of this or little less of that. But otherwise, our genetics has been a mix over a period of tens of thousands of years. Our segregation is more recent. As I said, our religions developed only about 2,000 years back. Maybe if you go, our Hindu is not really a religion, it's only about 3,000 years back. And Muslim is about 1,000 plus years back. So our differences are more recent. Our unifying theme is that we are all migrants and we are all Indians. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Is there any evidence of any religion at that prehistoric times? We say that okay, Hinduism was probably 2,000 years ago and Muslims probably 1,000 years ago. But during those times, was there any evidence of any sort of religion?
If you think what is the religion, and if you think about that period of time, where people were actually wandering around, hunters, gatherers, and that kind of life people had. And in that kind of ecosystem, you develop certain beliefs because you are observing stars, you are observing many things. And some of these beliefs become beliefs of the group, and then it spreads to a larger group, and it takes a kind of some form of a religion. And it becomes religion when there is a strong person, he dictates everything, and then it's organized religion. But this kind of tribal or traditional beliefs are many, very scattered, and they develop, and they are also very transient, because they are not interested in spreading their message. So these kind of belief system will be there, of course, will be there. But our records, there is nothing. Even if you see Vedic culture, it was documented much later. It was transmitted verbally, orally, and then somebody thought, I don't know when exactly, but maybe you would know, when the Vedas were written in the form that they are, but may not be more than 2,000 years. What I'm trying to say is that what we call religion is the organized religion that we see today. They had beliefs. They used to observe a lot of things in nature and they developed their own concepts for origin of universe, origin of people. Other men believe in another example of why people develop explanation for whatever they see. And that explanation is limited by what they can observe through their sensory system. Science is different because science also goes beyond sensory system. And it's not only what I see and what I hear. Science goes through instrumentation, a lot of things that we don't see. There are a lot of sound waves here, we don't hear, but our mobile can detect. So, कहने का मतलब यह है कि religion has taken a different shape in last few hundred years, and that is one aspect. But people's belief were there always, and that was developed, modified, changed, and evolved.
Can you say Dravids are also migrant?
Sorry?
Dravids are also migrant. Can you say that?
As I said, everybody is a migrant. Everybody. Human race developed in Africa, and everybody out of Africa is a migrant. And as I indicated, the first wave came about 65,000 years back through coastal region because we don't find those kind of people in the main continent. And that is how, so they were first migrants. So if you have to give a right of the country, you should give it to them. But they are all among us. But unfortunately, some of the thoughts that I have mentioned here, the hardcore Hindutva people don't like it. They think that everything, main good things develop in India and then it spread. But there is no evidence that much we must say. And they are really, the whole body of right wingers are really fighting this kind of nonsense. That's good.
How this two distinct culture developed, Dravidian culture and Aryan knowledge?
I will talk about Dravidian languages. Dravidian language is that you see Karnataka, Tamil, Andhra, they have developed more recently because as the waves were coming from northwest, some people were pushed on the east side and south side. And you don't find evidence of Dravidian languages in in this Vedic civilization. So they developed their languages about 1,500 years back because they were pushed back. But other than that, we don't know. What we know is that there is not much evidence of those culture in the Ganges, the other Hindu civilization. Yes, students. At least this should help us to get rid of many prejudices that we have against other groups. The Parsis are like this, these people are like South Indians are like this, etc. I think if you go to the fundamentals, as I said, we are all migrants and we are all Indians. So that's the theme that I want to leave you with.
Is there any evidences of resistance of amalgamation of different groups of
It's a good question. Was there any resistance in the amalgamation that we discussed? When there are migrations, when there are large groups of people coming, they have some uniqueness that the local people didn't have in defense, in agriculture techniques, or in meteorological or some such skill sets. And those skill sets are kind of mesmerizing to the people who are local habitants. So in the initial phase, we were kind of trying to adopt whatever was coming from outside. But when those people come, they also come with mixed mentality. They start thinking, हम तो ये हथियार है, मेरे को इसको मारने की ताकत है, इसको समझ नहीं आता. And they develop segregation, superiority induced segregation. And so it's not a resistance from people who were here, but resistance from people in mixing because they started considering themselves superior because of some practice or some skills. And that is the origin of caste-based system. And that is only about 1500 years back. And then, for example, people who did not want much of agriculture-related practices, they went into forest and they became tribals. And those kind of segregations started taking place, but they are all more recent, about 1500, 2000. So it's not a resistance, it is the superiority, the attitude of the migrants which has kept some people stuck. I don't know if I answered, but this is what I think. Yes.
Do you agree or do you refute Aryan imperialism theory?
See, this is like a question, it's in the book. When did we import our culture? Now we don't import our culture. We import something, imbibe it into our existing mindset, and that becomes the culture. So what we call Aryan is not the same Aryan that the other international definition of Aryan is. The international definition, even Germany uses the word Aryan, but that definition is different from ours. So, yes, people who came into India and settled in India and developed along with the people in India as Vedic and our Hindu culture, and they started being identified as Aryan. But the original source of this thing was local fundamentalists, they refute it, that no, we developed here and then we exported, and that's why they are calling it Aryan. But evidence is this. But we need a lot of data, and more than that, we need an open mind to consider and accept the data as it comes. Rather than we develop the data to our liking, we have to see the data and accept it, and then interpret to our best.
You mentioned that there is more diversity in India than any other place in the world. Why, if we see, can we interpret that as India was more receptive to any migrants, all the migrants, or was it because there were more actual inhabitants in India, so everybody found that as a good cultivating space or good? What was the reason that India was chosen for all these?
I think part of the answer is buried in your question. That India already had a pre-existing good population in the started from that people who came 65,000. So they had populated, so there was the original population. While in the other parts, there was no such ancient population to mix with. For example, when they went to America, they had a local, there was nothing there. There was no population, and that was the recent one, about 20,000. And that is where Red Indians developed. Similarly, during this spreading, India was the only one which got a good number of people from Africa, and we had developed the populations. for a long period of time, and then many waves came, and then we mixed with it. Now, the second part that was not part of your question, it was part of question not answered in your questions, was the diversity. And much of the diversity has developed in the last 2000 years, 1500 years, because of this caste-based segregation or class-based segregation. There is no other place where there is so much of caste-based segregation. If I give you an example of, let's say there were white people who brought black people in America. And for a while there was no intermarriage. But now there are 10% of the marriages are intermarriages. Now that was not the case in India so far. And if they mix its rate in about 200, 300 years ago, the population will be homogenized. So diversity develops because of segregation for a prolonged period of time. I think that's it. And now you are a teacher, you are not supposed to ask. You are also.
Yes, sir. I want in the same question, like there, apart from this diversity, can we consider the climate and weather also?
Yeah.
Like Darwin's adaptation theory can be also worked
Yes. Well, actually, climate and water resources, these are all major reasons why civilization develops in some places or it goes down in some places.
like in the PPT we saw some from Africa directly the people migrated to south.
Yeah.
And some from went to Europe and then to this Kashmir and East area.
Yes.
So weather conditions.
So ice age, that referred to ice age, that when ice age was ending, a lot of land were available to those primitive groups to migrate to a better pasture. Now, say something.
Climate and weather also.
Climate and weather. You see, the Indus civilization, I think one reason they say it went down because of the river like Saraswati, they had dried up. And that is one reason, and maybe other reasons as well. But yes, climate does make a lot of difference.
So it is the India only where we have deserts also, mountains also, ocean. Like 4 different things are there.
Yes.
So might be, it can be one.
That's why we are what we are.
Diverse.
So we should celebrate what we are.
Actually,
And that is the
sir.
point.
Actually,
In
sir.
history, who are actually the original inhabitants of India or this particular region?
You remember in my study, I had a South Indian woman, and we analyzed her mitochondrial DNA because she doesn't have Y chromosome, so I don't know about paternal ancestry. But mitochondrial DNA indicated that her maternal ancestry is derived from that original group about 65,000 years back. And that kind of mitochondria, we find a lot of them even in the mainland India, not only South India. The Kashmir, I told you, we sequenced considered the male paternal ancestry came just like Gujarati, about 10,000, 15,000. But her maternal ancestry goes back to 65,000. It's indicating the mixing that has taken place for so long period of time. And the segregation is now we identify as the Kashmiri, Punjab and others. But inside genetics are much more mixed than what we would like to accept. Students, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an informative session and taking us through the journey of our ancestry. I'm very much sure you all have enjoyed the session a lot. And as Yuval Harari rightly said, we cannot understand where we are going unless we understand where we are coming from. Okay, so I think your session has helped us a lot to solve that mystery. And thank you so much, sir, for sparing your time.
I hope it has created more mystery and more questions and then what it has answered. Because answers are simplified version of the questions are the real leading point.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to request Dr. Krishna Desai to deliver vote of thanks. Good morning, girls, and good morning, all the august audience present here. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Harish Pal sir for such an intricate session on from where we came from. This 23rd series of Abhigya is indeed special because we have participation after a long time on blended mode, that is from online as well as offline. A lot goes into the making of such kinds of events. So I would like to thank the technical teams of Vanita Vishram Women's College of Commerce and Vanita Vishram University for putting up such a lovely program which has seamlessly flown. I would also like to thank all the teaching and non-teaching faculty members who have today gathered here from different institutions. I also thank and acknowledge the presence of our in charge Deputy Registrar, Dr. Manisha Vyas Madam, for spending her time with us. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the audiences for their patience hearing. And I truly believe that a child who reads will be converted into an adult who thinks. And we are in need of thoughtful human beings. And indeed, this session has given me a lot of hope because we all know that we origin from a single place which is somewhere in African continent this day, and we have reached space. So there is a lot of hope and positivity for the human beings to develop further. We have been one of the strongest ones to last around 4,000, 2,000 years back after we were segregated into different countries. So with this note, I would like to thank everyone who is directly and indirectly involved in this session, and a very special thank you to our library committee, Dr. Shivang Mehta and Dr. Neha Raval, for arranging this monthly book review series every month. Thank you one and all. Thank you very much.